Hi everybody. Welcome to another day of our online adventure here with the Aquarium of the Pacific. My name is Sergio. I'm part of our education team, and today we are going to be talking about one of my absolute favorite, not only one of my favorite animals, but one of my favorite types of animals, groups of animals really. To start us off, I'm going to step aside here in a second, and I want you to look at the environment that I have going on behind me. Now, this is one of our exhibits here at the aquarium. I'm not going to tell you which one yet. I want you to take some time to really just make some observations. I want you to try to see, when I come back in, I'm going to ask you guys if you could figure out what kind of environment, maybe what part of the world this environment would be in, and what kinds of animals will be there, because we're going to be talking about a very specific kind of animal today, and it's actually in this exhibit. Sometimes it's hard to spot, so we'll see if you can get it. Now, while you're making those observations, if you feel like you want to let me know any of those observations, or throughout this day today, if you have questions that you want to ask, then you can actually text us live. As long as you're watching this live, this very moment, on September 27th at 10 o'clock in the morning, 26th, not tomorrow, 26th, then you can actually text in live. And the number you're going to text is right below me on screen right here. It is 562-286-1838. Now, if you are watching this at a later time, like say September 27th, not today, right? Then you can still ask us questions, but that is going to be through email. And that email is right under the phone number on screen, so live@lbaop.org. And those numbers should be up throughout this whole stream, so if you forget it or anything, you can always just look down. But I'm going to step aside, like I said, and I want you to take a look at this environment. Take a look at the kinds of animals, at the kinds of plants, and both living and non-living things in there, and then we'll get back in a second, okay? So what do we see? And remember, as you're making observations, you can always text in. And my friend, I'm not in the studio alone today. I have my friend Tina behind the scenes who will be getting those questions to me. Ooh, do we have one already? No. Okay. So let's see. What kind of animals are we seeing there? Ooh, is that a question? We got our first question. Why are there fish and sharks together? Well, that is a wonderful question. So out in the ocean, they're going to have many different animals together, right? We get that question here a lot, though, specifically at the aquarium, because a lot of people see sharks and fish together and they assume, oh, well, they must be there to eat each other, right? Here at the aquarium, we try to recreate as much of a natural environment as we can. So again, we don't keep these animals separated because they would be existing together in the ocean, in their natural habitat. And while they might feed, well, the sharks might feed on some smaller fish in their natural habitat, here that doesn't really happen much because we keep our animals on a regularly fed schedule so that they don't really have to go hunting for the fish that they're sharing their environment with. So animals, especially sharks, are very, very focused on keeping their energy preserved because they need it so much, since a lot of them are moving all the time and moving just a lot. Hunting takes a lot of energy, so they want to save as much as they can. So as long as we feed them, they don't really bother the fish around them. Okay, I'm going to step back into camera here, and let's talk a little bit more about this environment. So, any guesses what kind of environment this is? Let's see. Ooh, somebody said that it's a colorful one. That is absolutely true. This is a colorful one. So you can see kind of right behind me we have it. Anyone knows what these are, or what they're supposed to be? So these are examples of some different kinds of corals. And so where might we find a coral environment? You might have heard of them as coral reefs. Where might we find those? Where around the world? Ooh, somebody said Australia. Great. You can find them in places like Australia, right? So somewhere along the equator. Do we know what that means? The equator is this kind of, if we look at the globe, at the planet, right? Right going down the middle, that equator, that is the warmest part of the planet. It's where the water is usually nice and warm, and that's where we find most of our tropical environments. So our tropical environments, this is actually a tropical environment. This is a shark lagoon here at the aquarium, but all of these animals would be living in a tropical kind of environment where you would find corals and different animals like some of our tangs, so things that you might have been familiar with through a very specific Disney movie. Okay, I'm going to step aside real quick to see if I could spot the animal that I wanted to focus on today. So today we are going to be focusing, you might have read the title of the video, and you might be saying, sea turtles? Well, where are they? So here at Shark Lagoon, we actually have a sea turtle. It's one of our olive ridley sea turtles, I believe, but I don't quite see him in view. Normally, they are hiding right in that, right here, in this little cave. That tends to be their favorite spot, but I'm not seeing them right now. But that's okay. Maybe my friend Tina behind the scenes, we can get a photo of a turtle, or a sea turtle more specifically, so that we can start talking about our friends here. Ooh, and this is awesome. So we actually have, this is a video of a sea turtle. It's going to look kind of funny next to me. Now that's pretty cool. Oh, nice. Oh, here, let me step aside so you can see its beautiful little face. Great. Okay, so I'm going to step aside fully. I'm going to do another little round of observations. Now, at the very beginning, I said that we're going to be talking not just about one of my favorite animals, but one of my favorite groups of animals. So, does anyone know what group of animals do sea turtles belong to? What do you think? I encourage you to look at the different features of the animal and see if you can kind of connect the dots to other animals that you might be familiar with from different places like zoos or aquariums or just nature in general. Do we have somebody saying something? Ooh, so we got a great question right now from my friend named Willie. So Willie wants to know, is the water salt water? Are you asking about, if you're asking about the water in Shark Lagoon, yes, that is salt water. And that also applies to the water that you're seeing in this photo here. So sea turtles are living in saltwater environments. They're out in the sea, right? But that does raise a question. So we have sea turtles that we find in the ocean aren't the only kinds of turtles that you might know about. So we have sea turtles that live in the salty, sea ocean. But we also have freshwater turtles. And those are more of those kinds of turtles that you might be familiar with, that you might have seen in a pond or a lake, right? And even beyond that, we have turtles of a sort that live not in any water at all. I grew up in the desert area, and we saw a lot of desert tortoises. And so those tortoises are still technically turtles, but they have a slightly different name because they're not living in any sort of water environment. They are living completely on land. So you're starting to notice that the group of turtles is very diverse. They can live in different environments, but they all share certain characteristics that that still connects them throughout all of those differences. And we're going to start looking at some of those differences. So first off, if somebody said, so I would remember, if you think back for a second, I said, what group of animals are our turtles in? They are reptiles. So like we as animals, we are mammals. Shark Lagoon right now, we saw a couple of sharks and smaller fish, and those are all, well, fish. We also have birds, right? And we have reptiles. Whoop, we have a reptile right here, beautiful sea turtle. So turtles, sea turtles, and tortoises are all reptiles. And if we think about the characteristics that define a reptile, what makes a reptile? Well, we can see one of them right now. So if we look at the texture or the skin of the animal, of the sea turtle right here, what do you see? Do you see all of these kinds of, I guess the best way to describe them is almost like tiles. Those little tile pieces. What do we call those? Does anyone know? That's right, we call those scales. So most reptiles, and now we're going to talk about this a little bit deeper in a second, but most, I'm not saying all though, most reptiles have these scaly plates. So you can think about other reptiles like snakes, lizards, right? The tortoises and the freshwater turtles, including these sea turtles that we're looking at, they have those scaly plates. So whereas mammals are defined by having hair, right? That's a very important feature. The reptiles have scales most of the time. There's always exceptions. Oh, this is a great image here. You can really see the texture of the scales right along underneath, and then especially right on the fins right there. Those look really great. Absolutely. But you can still see that there is, right, it's not all just hard scales. There are still those soft, fleshy parts to them. So they do start to kind of look a little bit different throughout them. All right, so let's see. We have scales is a big part. Oh, this is a great one. And now we're going to touch, this is a very important one. I want you to look closely to this one, because this is called a leatherback sea turtle. And this is, we're going to focus in on this animal in a little bit here, but remember how I just said that I wasn't saying all turtles or all reptiles have scales for a reason? Well, this leatherback is a great example of that. So we call them a leatherback because of their leathery skin. I'm going to step aside real quick. Now you can see on their shell is not made up of those kind of classic plate-like structures that the other turtles we were looking at have. Yeah, instead their shell is a lot more of this fine, leathery texture. So they're a lot more, lot fleshier than some of the other turtles that we were looking at. Now they still have that shell is still a little bit harder than maybe the rest of their skin, but it's definitely not as plated as the other ones we were looking at. And there are some specific reasons for that, but we'll get to that in a second. Now, expanding on what makes reptiles reptiles, reptiles also breathe air, so they do not breathe water. And this is going to be interesting for the sea turtles specifically, right? And the lake turtles, or freshwater turtles that we were talking about in a second. So they have to breathe air. They cannot breathe underwater like fish do. They do not have gills. They have a lung system just like we do. And so that means that they have to come to air. Oh, in this video here, you can see a great example of a sea turtle breaching up over the water. Nice. To get a big gulp of air. And now, different kinds of turtles can hold their breaths for different amounts of time. It also depends on what they're doing. Most sea turtles, they can stay underwater up to 2 hours if they are mostly just resting. So if they're being really, really active, swimming around a lot, maybe looking for food, then they might have to come up every couple of minutes. But if they're just kind of relaxing, maybe just sitting on the ocean floor, taking a nap or something, then they can stay down in the ocean for a pretty long time. So they breathe air. They also have a backbone. So just like we do, we have a backbone, but not all animals, especially not in the ocean, have backbones. So this is a very important part of them. So the fact that they have a backbone means they're vertebrates. And that is a very important part when it comes to classifying what makes an animal into a certain group. And now the last one that I wanted to talk about, last two that I want to talk about, is they are cold-blooded. So you see this a lot more with some of the tortoises that we're used to seeing on land. If you have a pet tortoise by any chance, or even just a pet lizard, because all lizards or all reptiles are, so a snake or a lizard if you have one of those, all reptiles are cold-blooded, meaning that they can't regulate their body temperature on their own. They need an outside source of temperature to warm their bodies. That's why for a lot of the times when we have these animals as pets, we have to have heat lamps that keep them warm. Out in their natural environments, they rely on the sun as their source of heat, and so that's why you'll see these reptiles really basking in the sun a lot. And now that also means that when things get really cold, then they actually kind of go into a bit of a hibernation. It's pretty cool. We won't touch on it too much, but it is something that's really interesting. I encourage you to look more into that. All right, and then the last thing that makes these animals reptiles is that they lay eggs. So mammals are defined by giving live birth, right? We don't lay eggs, but reptiles do. They lay their eggs. And turtles laying eggs is going to be another topic of ours. But for this next part, I want to focus back in on those leatherback sea turtles. So if we can maybe get another photo of that leatherback sea turtle back up. Great, wonderful. So this is one of 7 kinds of turtles, or sea turtles specifically. So there are about 7 kinds of sea turtles. I'm going to step aside just so you can get a good image of this. And the reason we're focusing in on this leatherback sea turtle, they're one of the most interesting among this group. So among the 7 types of sea turtles, the leatherback is actually the largest kind of sea turtle. When they are fully grown, they can be up to 6 feet long. So from kind of the head to their back fins, they could be up to 6 feet long, and they can weigh up to 2,000 pounds, which is a lot. It's pretty cool. And you can kind of see it in this image, right? This is a very close-up image, but you can really get the size of it, I think, pretty clearly. I mean, just looking at this flipper alone, that's pretty huge, right? And those shells are massive, too. Now, we talked about how their shells aren't as hard as others. So actually, I'm going to come over to my document camera, if we can switch over to that, so we can look at one. Great. So that we can look at, So we can look at this shell here. So I'm going to hold this up. So this one, I believe, is from a yellow belly slider. See if we can get a light on this. Nice, okay. So this one's from a yellow belly slider, so not quite the turtles that we're looking at. Not even really a sea turtle, actually. But it's a great example. So you can hear, I don't know if you can hear the knock on that. There you go. See, no one's at your door. It's just me knocking on the turtle. But you can see these hard plates. You can also see inside of there. And so the shells of these turtles, sea turtles, tortoises, and freshwater turtles, they are actually fused to their bodies. So you can see kind of the remnants of that rib cage and that backbone that we were talking about. So they are fused to their bodies, and it's really just like a part of their skeletal system. Now, that's what a harder shell looks like. So that's what pretty much all other turtles and sea turtles, their shells look like. But if we go back to our leatherback turtle, you'll see that they have a very different looking one. So we don't have an example of those here, but you can see it really clearly on here that they have these kinds of ridges. They actually have 5 ridges along their back. It's one of the most definitive features about them. And they have that leathery, kind of flexible shell to them. And there's a very specific reason. Does anyone have any guesses why they might have a flexible shell instead of a really hard one by any chance? Let's see, I'll give you guys a few seconds. See if anyone has any guesses as to why their shell would be flexible instead of hard like the other ones. Any guesses? Okay. Well, if you were brainstorming and you were thinking, well, obviously it must be because they dive deep, then you were totally right. I know, may be a bit of a stretch. But these turtles are actually, another thing that makes them really fascinating is that they dive deeper than any other sea turtle. Now these animals, these leatherback sea turtles, they can dive as deep as 4,000 feet down into the ocean. For reference, if you have ever been scuba diving or just seen a person scuba dive, most human divers wouldn't go past 100 feet down. So these guys can go down to 4,000 feet. Yeah, and because of that, when they go deep, deep down under the ocean, pressure changes, right? Because you have so much water that's weighing down on you. And so it's really useful for this animal to, instead of having a hard shell, to have a softer shell. So that softer, leathery, flexible shell, that makes it so that when they are under a lot of pressure deep in the ocean, they're not really pushing too hard in on themselves and not hurting as much. So keeping flexible actually really helps them survive in their environment. So that's pretty cool. Another thing I want you to look at is its face. Look at that. You can see its cute little eyes right there. But I want you to pay attention to its beak, which is kind of funny because we usually talk about that with birds, but really I just mean its mouth. Now it's kind of hard to see in this image, but you can still kind of see the line right there where their bottom beak or set of their mouth meets the top. But they actually have a pretty sharp beak. So those two plates are up there. They can actually be pretty sharp along the edges because they are relying on those to act kind of like scissors to really cut through what they're trying to eat. So does anyone happen to know what a leatherback sea turtle's favorite food is? Anyone know? I will give you a hint. It would go great on a underwater peanut butter sandwich. What could it be? If you guessed jelly, you're right. So one of these guys. So most of us know them as jellyfish. Here at the aquarium, we call them sea jellies because they aren't actually fish. So we like to give them more accurate representation. These sea jellies here are the main part of the leatherback sea turtle's diet specifically. Now, not all sea turtles eat jellies. Some eat mostly like green turtles. They mostly eat vegetation, so things like seaweed and other plants in the ocean. Other turtles will eat things like sea sponges, but our leatherback sea turtles, they specialize in eating sea jellies. And that's why they have that beak or that mouth that's really made for that. They're able to cut through that gelatinous kind of squishy texture to really get a nice piece of that jelly cut out so that they can eat it. Now, we're going to go back to my document camera here because I have something for us to look at. Now, before we look at what I really want to show, I will show you this because I had it here and I think it's pretty cool. So here's an example of a sea sponge. So I had mentioned that some of those species like to eat these sea sponges, and actually the hawksbill sea turtle, that's the one that likes to eat these sea sponges. So that's what it would be eating. Yeah, which is pretty cool. But now, thinking about back to those sea jellies and the leatherbacks, I want us to look at what's in here. Let's see. You see that it's floating in water. Any guesses what this might be? It does have to do with the eating habits, the food of a leatherback sea turtle that we were just talking about. Any guesses what this is in this jar here? So if you said, oh, this must be an example of a sea jelly that they would be eating, that would be a great guess, but not quite. So this is actually a plastic bag. Yeah, so just a piece of plastic made by humans that we put in a jar of water. And the reason that I love to show this is because it really, really helps to capture the reason behind why you might hear a lot of talk, especially at places like the aquarium here. We can go back to our camera or our feed over here. We can put that picture of the jellies back up. And so it really captures the reason why we, especially at an aquarium, talk about keeping plastics out of the ocean. Because as you saw, those, let's see if I can pull it over here with me. So as you see, these, kind of blends in, these jellies look a lot like this plastic bag, right? Especially from a distance. Now imagine you had the eyes of a sea turtle, not of a human. It'd be even harder to tell, especially floating in the water. So a lot of the time, what happens for these sea turtles when there are just plastics floating around in the ocean, they mistake them for sea jellies, and they end up trying to eat them. And this leads to one of the big issues about trying to conserve these animals. Because I know we've been focusing on leatherback sea turtles, but like I said, there are 7 different kinds of sea turtles out in the ocean, and almost all of them are endangered, the leatherback sea turtle specifically being critically endangered. Now, what does that mean? That means that as a species, there aren't as many as we would like left out in the ocean. And as members of this earth, especially here at the aquarium, we take that very seriously, and we like to try to conserve these animals and help repopulate them out in their natural environment so that they can really keep the ecosystems as healthy as they once were. Because as we talk about these species being endangered, a lot of the reasons for that status of these animals kind of comes back to humans. So like I mentioned, plastics and pollution is one big part. So animals like these leatherbacks, they find these plastics, they think it's food, and then they eat it, and then that really hurts them internally, right? They're not made to digest these harsh plastics. It also can just get them caught. I'm sure you've seen photos or heard about sea turtles getting caught in plastic rings or sometimes straws. I know that's been a very big one, especially here in California where we're filming from. But these harsh plastics, but not just these hard physical pollutants, which is what we call any type of pollution, but also chemical pollution. That's another big one too. So things like runoff from waste facilities, but also chemical runoff that can be even as simple as sunscreen. So some sunscreens, especially in these sensitive environments like the coral reefs that we're talking about, sunscreen is actually really regulated there. That wash damaging to some of these delicate animals. Now, another large reason for these animals' endangered status is actually human fishing. And so the way we fish, especially on a large scale, is through casting wide nets out in the oceans, but there isn't somebody down there monitoring everything that gets caught in that net, right? So a lot of the time what we were seeing is that these sea turtles would be getting caught in the nets, and they would be too big to escape, so they would just end up getting hurt and often die from that. Now, one of the solutions that that humans have come up with is what we call TEDs, and I think we have a video of one being in use. Okay, we'll find that here in a second. But a TED, what does that stand for? TED. TED or TED stands for Turtle Extraction Device. Exclusion device, sorry. Turtle exclusion device. Now, what are we excluding them from? Well, we were just talking about nets, right? So a TED or turtle exclusion device, I'll step aside here, is basically a special type of fishing net that is made with this special kind of pocket here, so you can kind of see where this turtle is coming from. So it's basically a special net that opens in a specific way to let sea turtles out, but not any fish that would be caught. So it's very cool. Again, it just opens in a specific way so these sea turtles have basically an exit hatch. So that if they're ever caught in those nets, then they can just kind of swim out pretty easily, but other fish aren't able to do so. I think we actually have a video here that we can show you in a second. But it is pretty cool. It's not something that you see very often. Let's see, I'll step aside here. So you can see right through that opening. It happened pretty quick. I think it'll restart over here in a second, but there we go. Right there, nice. And you can really see it does kind of, there you go, how it worked its way out of that kind of opening, that TED. And that goes a long way, right? Because that was a huge source of threat to these animals, but now that's slowly starting to solve that problem. And of course, we are also trying to change our fishing habits as a species around the world so that we are fishing in more sustainable ways so that we don't really have to resort to these large-scale net fishing that kind of glide along the bottom and grab different animals and can sometimes hurt the environment itself too. So that's another part of that conservation effort that we as a species are trying to do. Now, thinking about these animals, another big part to conserving the sea turtle is making sure that they are able to reproduce effectively. So, oh, beautiful. So we have a couple of little baby leatherback sea turtles. So sea turtles, like I said, they spend their whole lives in the ocean except for one specific time, and that is when they are coming up to the surface, to the beaches, in order to lay their eggs. Because remember, sea turtles, or all reptiles, lay eggs. So what they do is these leatherbacks, they return to the same beach where they were born. Every year they have to lay eggs. They come to that same beach. They find it. Scientists still aren't fully 100% sure how they're even able to find their way, because these leatherback sea turtles, they are some of the most migratory animals in the ocean, especially out of the other kinds of turtles. Now, what does that mean? Migratory means that they are moving around the entire ocean. You can find these leatherback sea turtles in almost every part of the ocean, except where it gets too cold. But they move around the entire ocean, and yet they're still able to find their way back home, or back to those beaches where they need to lay their eggs. Once they lay their eggs, they bury them a little bit in the sand so that they're protected from the elements and from predators. And then a really interesting thing actually happens. The temperature of the sand that these animals are buried in actually determines what gender the turtle baby is going to come out as. So the warmer the sand is, the more likely that the animal is a turtle. And if it's slightly cooler sand, then it will be a male turtle. Now, remember, if we connect this back to the idea of threats, then another big threat here is global warming. So the changing temperature, not just on the ocean or in the ocean, but on the surface temperature of the planet as well, right? So if they are very dependent on that temperature for a part of their reproduction, then increased global warming can actually really damage them, because we won't have the right balance of both in order to keep healthy populations at healthy numbers. Now, another thing is, because these animals are living on these beaches, they are really vulnerable to human development. So when people are building things like homes or things like hotels on these beautiful beaches, that can often take some of these nesting habitats away from these sea turtles, and that again also hurts the opportunity to help them become healthier and repopulate at a more effective level so that they are able to have as many turtles out there in the ocean. Now, of course, there's always answers to these solutions, and as an individual, what you can do is, one, you can support institutions like the Aquarium of the Pacific, ones that are working to help preserve these animals and do conservation efforts. You can also just think about eating more sustainable seafood, right? So making sure that the seafood that you eat more seafood in general is usually better for the planet and better for the sea animals. But making sure that we're looking for sustainable efforts. But other than that, I think the easiest thing that we can do is just keep educating yourself, and keep looking for opportunities to learn about these animals. Now, with that, our day here has come to an end. But I want to thank you all for joining us here online. And again, I want to thank you guys for taking the opportunity to learn about these animals. Thank you to everyone who wrote in. And again, if you ever want to ask us any further questions, you can always email us with that number or that email from the beginning. Okay, other than that, thank you guys so much. I hope you have a wonderful day.